Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. My name is Marcia Trajano. I'm your host, and with me is Yuri Castro. Yuri, so good to have you back with us. And for those of you who do not know him, he is a clinical psychologist and a spiritist, member of the Conscious Living Spiritist Group, and he lives in North Miami in Florida. Hi, Yuri.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Marcia. It's a pleasure to be back here.
Awesome. It is good to have you back. But for you who's here with us, and this is perhaps the first time you're watching, listening to the podcast program, please note that our program, Psychology and Spirituality, weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna Angelis, and we're here to provide, in a very informal conversation, a safe space to for us to just think about what do we define certain things, how do we can we confront? It's a very, very safe space, but can we also compare, correlate, and most importantly, expand our concepts from both spiritual and psychological lens? Today's program, I want to thank all of those organizations that are sponsoring us are Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council, and AMI Brazil. Yuri, I was thinking, right, about the fact that a lot of us are dealing today with the so-called obsessive compulsive disorder. And when we do this, we report some, the fact that some life changes, it may be positive or negative, it doesn't matter. They can be so stressful that they trigger some of the symptoms. And I understand that it doesn't matter what it is. It could be, let's say, oh, I'm starting a new job. Boom, and I get my OCD triggered, or I lost my job, or I'm moving out of my parents' home, or I'm moving to another city. Oh, I'm getting to a new relationship, happiness, or even getting married, getting engaged, getting divorced, right? So there's a plethora of triggering um, uh, ideas or events that may be quite difficult for anyone to deal with. In addition to those external events, I understand that lack of sleep, not eating well, or eating, not moving enough, or even hormonal changes can trigger that. And you, as a clinical psychologist, I'd love to hear from you. Can we start, perhaps, Yuri, with the definition? What is OCD?
Yes, I think you bring up some interesting points. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. In simple terms, OCD can be understood as these obsessions. So the O is the obsessions. Those are thoughts, images, or urges. So that's the definition from the DSM 5 TR, which is a diagnostic statistical manual. That's the one that psychiatrists and psychologists, at least in the United States, we use to diagnose people. So these obsessions are these thoughts, images, or urges, and they're unwanted, they're unpleasant, and the compulsions are the behaviors that people do to compensate for the anxiety and or distress caused by those thoughts.
So let me see if I understand. So it's a dichotomy, if you will, the two sides of the equation. One are the fixations, may I call it fixed ideas, obsessions, images. So it's very mental. And then compulsion, the other component of it is actually expression of that. Is that a maybe a coping mechanism, or something that helps us with OCD to deal with that obsession or imagery? Can you explain better?
Absolutely. So the obsessions, like I said, these images, thoughts, or urges, these are internal processes. So these
Okay.
are, if we think of a domino effect of sorts, of a
Mm-hmm.
sequence,
Yeah.
these thoughts, images of or urges, they come to the person and then they do the behaviors, the compulsions, to
Okay.
alleviate the distress and anxiety as a compensatory mechanism for those thoughts, images, or urges.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting here to highlight that these behaviors can be
Hmm.
overt, they can be things that we observe, or they can be
Yeah.
covert. They can be internal things
Ah,
that they do as well that we don't realize.
yeah.
So people with OCD, for instance, they start counting on their heads or
Hmm.
like repeating a prayer over and over and over and over. And from the outsider's perspective, we wouldn't know that
Yeah.
they're doing
Yeah.
that compensatory behavior, but they are.
But there is, regardless if it's very visible or not, there is a consequence to that. And I wonder, Yuri, when we say that, and it's sad. I don't know your thoughts about it, but I have seen way too many comedic expressions or um, showing, expressing that in the media out there, be it movies or even stand-up comedians talking about those expressions of that compulsive disorder. One movie that I remember, we talked about in the program actually, as good, I think it was As Good as It Gets, with Jack Nicholson. He has obsessive compulsive disorder, and that's not the most the most dramatic ones. There are other in the comedian type of things. It's the series called Monk, that he just right, he goes home, he comes back, and he has to do a certain number of number of behaviors to quiet his mind that he's done, right? And I hate to see this, this dismissive way to look at something that can be quite difficult to deal with it. I understand, you treat OCD patients, and from that perspective, can you, without talking about any one patient in specifically, but can you tell us some of the things that you look for as a clinician to say, oh yeah, this is OCD, and then how does it work, working with somebody to help them in this condition?
Yes, there's a lot there. So let me try to address some of these points that you brought up. So one
Yeah.
is the expression through the media and through no television of
Yes.
the OCD condition. In fact, there is a misrepresentation of so many different psychiatric diagnoses in the media
True.
and movies. One that always comes to my mind, it's schizophrenia,
Yeah.
bipolar. Those are severe and persistent mental illnesses. There are often very misrepresented, and even the profession of the psychologist itself, if I may say, is very
Yeah.
misrepresented oftentimes.
Yeah.
The OCD, specifically the OCD, is something that causes extreme distress in the person. It's something
Hmm.
that causes um, impairment in their social life, in
True.
those ways. So the idea here is that when we're helping somebody with OCD, what we're doing, in fact, is we're trying to help them live a more meaningful life, a more fulfilling life, being rid of those symptoms or the compulsions, the
Hmm.
compensatory behaviors that they try to engage in, or they engage in because of the obsessions. And the
Hmm.
idea is that the obsessions, when they
Hmm.
occur, they do the compensatory behaviors, but that becomes a cycle because for a moment, their anxiety may be lowered, their distress may be
Yeah.
lowered, but then when the obsessions come back, those thoughts come back. They have to do it either more in terms of quantity or more intensity. So we often see the washing hands, right? Let's give that as an example.
Yeah.
So for the people who have OCD related to we call like the germophobes and things like that, contamination obsessions, they wash their hands 3 times. But
Yeah.
then when the obsession comes back, the thought comes back.
Yeah.
They're gonna think three is not enough. So they're gonna do
Yeah.
five,
Yeah.
and then seven, and then 10. And all of a sudden you have somebody who's spending 2, 3 hours a day washing their hands. Their hands are, the skin is already very hurt.
Yeah.
And then you have that's when you have the problem. That's why I said there's a severe, like, not necessarily severe, but there's a remarkable distress and
Yeah.
impairment in someone's life because of the OCD condition.
And there are many in the germophobia specific expression. There are many very well-known people that have had that, right? One of them, of course, is Howard Hughes. I think there's even a movie about it where he had to remove himself over, more and more because of uh, the fear that he would be contaminated by germs. And as we know, it's very interesting, especially with the pandemic that we all went through, 2020, right, to 2022, when things started to stabilize a little bit. Um, but that triggered even more. I can say from a personal perspective, and I don't believe it was OCD, but I understand, and I know personally individuals that would go to, let's say, to the grocery store or have it delivered and spend hours with cleaning each product with very harsh chemicals, right, to clean, and then all their shoes had to be sterilized, and there's just all those things that you're going to think twice before you go out, right? And I know individuals that live in high rises that just became shut in because they felt that if they were ever to go into an elevator, they would get sick. So it's one larger event, the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And how we internalize that immersion in an environment that potentially can hurt you.
And I think you bring a very good point, because when you were mentioning earlier about the triggers, that
Yeah,
can happen, that will eventually become perhaps an OCD, like full
yeah,
blown OCD, condition.
yeah, yeah,
The pandemic is a big one because we all suffered through that, and everybody's anxiety went up, and the fear
yeah,
of contamination went up, understandably so.
yeah,
But
yeah.
of course, that led to some people who perhaps didn't have that condition to
Mm,
acquire that condition,
yeah,
because of these uncontrollable environmental factors that
yeah,
happen. So,
yeah,
and the idea to that, and it's an interesting one, because the fear of contamination, the OCD related to that, we
yeah,
think of people washing their hands, washing or cleaning their houses, but one aspect of that specific OCD type is that
yeah.
they often avoid public places, right?
Yes.
Avoid so then when we're talking before about impairment, can you imagine, like, avoiding all public places? That would hinder someone's work
Yeah.
capability or work options, friendship options, socialization options. So the person starts to become very limited because of that condition, because of
So
those
it's yeah.
obsession and the compulsions.
So it's spiraling, right? It gets worse and worse. You mentioned quantity, and or not just,
Intensity.
yeah, intensity. Thank you. Of those mechanisms to alleviate the compulsive behavior, to alleviate the obsession. And then we also have the idea that it may also lead to uh, being isolated. And this is the big, the paradox here. We are, in essence, gregarious animals. We're social animals. We need the touch. We need the closeness. We need the sense of belonging. But this one disorder, it's a disorder, right? OCD, the D in OCD is disorder, leads to difficulties in what would otherwise be just day to day source of happiness, or perhaps disappointment, etc. But still, it's part of our repertoire of moments in a day's life, right? I was thinking, just to try to address how Joanna de Angelis thinks about it before I hear more from you from the clinical side, Yuri, because my, as we all most of us know, Joanna de Angelis is a spiritual author, and the work that she's been working or bringing to us is through the very close partnership by Divaldo Franco. right? The medium, Brazilian medium, and in the I think it was late '80s and beginning '90s. So it's there is a already a length of time where Divaldo Franco started to bring to us through his mediumship books by Joanna de Angelis, including the psychological collection of the psychology series, and this is a series of 16 books. One of my favorite, Yuri, and it's just by far my favorite of all of them, is the book called Existential Conflicts. Right, so it she Joanna brings us a lot of conflicts that we go through, and some of them is, I don't know, could be anxiety, could be anger, could be fear, could be jealousy, things that we all have to deal with it. But she discusses OCD, or generalized obsessive compulsive behaviors, and she says that usually the spiritual root cause of this is unresolved inner conflicts, or repressed emotions, right? So whatever it is, either I have a conflict, and it can be a conflict with, I don't know, my father or a father figure in my life, and that can lead to that ideation that you refer to, or it can be thoughts of, I don't know, children do this, right? Oh, I hate my mom, and this is very caricaturesque, put in my father and my mother in this example, but be as it may, I'm continuing with this example, and we say, I wish you were not my mother. So those are very strong emotion as a child, and then I'm not a good daughter, right? So we start to repress those emotions, and that leads to a certain level of spiritual imbalance, right? So how do we handle that, do you think? Whatever it is that trigger inner conflicts, repressed emotions, or, as we mentioned before, hormonal imbalance, or I'm going through a lot of stress, and it's leading to that I fall into this trap that is called obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yes, excellent. I like that book a lot as well.
I
And
love it.
no,
Yeah.
and it's great that you bring Joanna, because obviously she broadens the topic so much, going from the clinical to the spiritual side of things. She talks a
Yeah.
lot in throughout all those books about these neurotic behaviors. She always talking about the mind, body, spirit connection. So
Hmm.
she's
Yeah.
adding a third component that clinical
Yeah.
psychology
Yeah.
as a whole does not usually account for,
Uh-huh.
which can cause a myopic view of things, in my opinion, as a
Well,
psychologist and a spiritist.
absolutely. And I may just ask you, what are your thoughts? Because I know you're clinical psychologist, so you have your in your body work as well as your education a very specific dealing not only with the mental health but physical health, because they're interrelated. But as a spiritist, you have this large knowledge of spiritual influences, including OCD. How do you manage that, Yuri? How do you handle that intersection between the two?
So again, I think that she, like, her broadening the horizons, or broadening the perspective of
Uh
OCD is
huh.
great, because we account for the spiritual side of things, and in that
Yeah.
we can discuss at some point the,
Yeah.
obsessions, or we can discuss past lives, how that can impact OCD, which it definitely can, as Joanna
Yeah.
talks in multiple books. But this idea of, like obsessions being, she says, these storms in one's mind. So
Yeah.
it's this idea that they can come and they can completely control our thoughts, to the point where we start to develop these compulsory behaviors, the
Yes.
compulsions, and
Yeah.
then it becomes unbearable. And that's the idea that she's saying. As far as treatment, she's an advocate of psychological
Yeah.
treatment, but she's
Yes.
also saying about prayer, about meditation, about these more holistic approaches to the mind body spirit connection, which is extremely interesting in my opinion.
And you who is here with us today, we're listening together, right? You may think, Marcia, Yuri, I am tired, and I'm joking here, everyone, but you may be thinking, indeed, I am tired of you giving me the same tools to deal with something that is impairing to me. Yes, you say about meditation and prayer and and all of this, but it doesn't help me. So Yuri, what do you say for those of us who think that way? Because it is quite simplistic, right? If you think about it, it doesn't deviate much. It is all about self-discovery, self-love, right? Self-forgiveness. And when we start to get into this new, if you think in terms of your spiritual, emotional ecosystem of that is balanced, that is really well. There's a sense of equilibrium and balance, and there's room for everything to work. Then, when we pray and you go back to that moment of homeostasis, right? You're balanced. You have a sense of harmony. Then things are better. And OCD specifically, it brings, just as you're speaking earlier, it is really someone trying to bring some sort of control to an otherwise chaotic, mentally speaking, chaotic view of the moment, right? It's not, I am a chaotic person, but I'm trying to create a sense of control in my life by whatever the behavior may be.
Yeah, the idea of the trying, Joanna does bring up that topic of the sense of trying to get a sense of control or trying to, get
Uh-huh.
some um she talks about the connection with our spiritual essence. So
Yeah,
we live in a very uncontrollable environment. There are
we
so many
do.
things we cannot
Yeah.
control. And when we think of these things that are outside of our control, the one feeling that arises in every one of us is anxiety. But when that
Yes.
anxiety is exacerbated, that's when you start to see the development of these OCD behaviors, because the obsessions are there, the compulsory behaviors come. And to answer your question, for those who, like you said, for those who like, you keep saying the same tools and all of that, it sounds oversimplistic, but the idea is when the more we use to help the condition, so let's say psychological treatment,
Yeah.
spiritual treatment through something simple as like the habit of prayer, or like
Yeah.
installing like a prayer in your day, like a true
Yeah.
prayer, meditation, self-love, like self, forgiveness, like you said, who can also be achieved through therapy, and in more extreme cases even the use of psychotropic medication, like use
Yes.
of a psychiatrist to help with extreme severe cases of OCD. There are so many tools to help, but the idea is, I think that oftentimes people, even in therapy, they come and they say, I tried this, I tried that. If we look deeper, if we take like a closer look, we'll see a few challenges and holes that existed in that plan or in the
I
execution
see.
of the plan.
Hmm.
So oh, I'm trying prayer, but I pray once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I like to use, when people come like that through through the clinic and stuff, I like to use the physical analogy because people understand better. I say, okay,
Uh-huh.
let's say you're trying to lose weight and you go
Yeah.
to a dietitian, they give you exactly what you need to eat and how
Yeah.
much exercise you need to do. For the first week you do it, but then the second one you're just exercising for 30 minutes once a week because life gets in the way and you're not eating as you're supposed to. You're not going to go back and say, hey, I didn't lose weight, I came here and
Yeah.
I didn't lose weight. So it's, I think it's the same a lot of these times with these meditation techniques, with these, these are all habits. These are things that when they're done properly, when they're done with frequency, with, with discipline. That's a big word
Yeah.
that Emmanuel is very keen on, another
Yeah.
spirit author.
Yeah.
Um, these things are done with the purest of intentions, with discipline, like we start to see the results. So
Yeah.
that's one of my recommendations then.
Yeah, and on a different way, we can start to look for the triggers, right? What are my triggers? Which is this self-awareness, at a minimum, self-awareness. I get anxious when da da da. Therefore, let's deal with that situation in a way that is not a source of so much fear, anxiety, and ultimately my triggering my OCD. But I'm also thinking in terms of uh, you mentioned, Yuri, we live in a very out of control society. Our days are as diverse and complex as we can imagine. If you look at the history of civilization, right, we're becoming progressively more complex, even though technology. And I mean that field of technology from a health perspective, right? The technology is becoming more and more advanced to kind of simplify our lives, but it's not. The more life becomes quote unquote simple because of technology, the more we're offered. And our decision making process is becoming so difficult because there's just too much to choose, too much to watch, too much to pay attention. And we've become, in fact, a very distracted society, right, Yuri? It's hard now, and this is my personal belief, or thought process here, is that we've got more and more used to intrusions to our lives. And I remember as a young adult talking about don't laugh at me, I'm old. But my bachelor's degree was in architecture, and at that time, one of the discussions that still reverberates today was the fact that the controlling aspect of a TV from an architectural perspective, where we not only have the TV taking over the living room, but we have the TV room or the TV in the bedroom, a TV in the bathroom, right? TV in restaurants, TV, and it was very interesting how at that time we talked about the intrusive nature of an object of technology in this case, to with at the time maybe three, four, five channels, and today, Yuri, it doesn't matter, right? It's thousands of channels, thousands of inputs into our daily lives that is not stationary to a room. It actually, right, goes with you.
Yes.
This little thing here, I can be anywhere, anytime, and I can be opening myself to a source of input, and it can be news, it can be a text, it can be a spam, or even people trying to fraudulently want you to, I don't know, this is joking here, but work and make $600,000 in a week. We get those, like, come work for us, and we get these
Yeah.
promises of an idyllic state of professional life, and it's coming to you. So how do we stop? How do we create peace and silence and the ability to go back? I love what you said about discipline, with a disciplined approach to creating a moment of harmony, that you are okay to be with yourself. And being okay with yourself, you now become okay to be with others.
Excellent point. Because yeah, we live in a very hectic and unpredictable world, and
Yeah.
we see so much disconnection in the age of connection, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
it's very much like you said, nowadays everything is at our fingertips. Everything, we
Yeah.
can bring these amazing devices anywhere we want, but at the same time feel so lonely and so disconnected. And
Yeah.
the distractions are have never been so much. Like the
Yeah.
amount of distractions is so incredible, that we see, people having difficulty reading books and like
Yeah.
studying and doing, especially like the younger population.
Yeah, focusing,
Absolutely.
right? Being able to focus in the written language and absorb the content without having to rely on a documentary or a video, etc. You're on mute, Yuri.
Sorry, and I think
Right.
it all goes through developing
Mhm.
these habits. And
Yeah,
when people say, "Oh, I can't read and I can't focus, I can't do that," if we start, we mentioned like finding this inner peace. I think if we
yeah,
bring to like something a good reading, perhaps let's like,
yeah,
grab a book that's a good book, and dedicate 5 minutes every day. If you can't do more,
yeah,
do 5 minutes every day, and then all of a sudden you're going to be doing 10, and then
yeah.
do a prayer like 1 minute, reserve 1 minute to find inner peace, inner silence, and thank
Oh,
god, and like express gratitude. So these
yeah,
things, the idea here is to start small. When we want to develop these habits from a behavioristic standpoint, we
yeah,
want to start small with achievable, measurable goals,
yeah,
and things that are relevant to us. So the idea is finding these inner peace is not gonna it's gonna, at least it's gonna be very hard to start with, okay, I'm gonna meditate for 1 hour every day, and I'm gonna read for 2 hours every day, like something like. Don't try lofty goals. My
yeah,
recommendation is try something small. Set aside 5 minutes of your
yeah,
day to read something that's gonna be productive to your own well-being. Some spirit, there's so many spiritist books, or books on psychology, whatever it is that's going to be helpful to you.
yeah,
Read one of Joanna de Angelis book for 5 minutes every day.
yeah, yeah,
And then you start to develop that habit, and all of a sudden, that inner peace you're talking about, that inner sanctuary that we're taking care of, that Emmanuel so emphasizes, someone
yeah,
emphasizes so much, it's gonna start to come gradually,
yeah,
and fostering that and feeding it as if we're like nurturing a small plant, a small seed that's going to start to grow. And
yeah.
that's how we should think of it, I think.
I love the word that you use, building a sanctuary, and it's a gift that we can give to ourselves, right? A gift of a peace, a gift of and no judgment here, right? In our case, I think both of us are avid readers, so reading a book comes as a natural selection, but it could be just I don't know, I have my cup of coffee here, right? It could be a cup of tea. Just take a moment to be in silence and drink that cup of coffee and just take the moment to be with ourselves without having to have that intrusion. And TV, movies, books, they're okay, right? They're
and
okay.
and
We're
when
not
yeah
gonna we're
and
not gonna
and the,
destroy those, right? Go ahead.
absolutely,
Yeah,
it's about finding a better use of the time, I think, not necessarily
yeah,
just throwing everything out the window,
yeah.
because, and I always say this, people like, I haven't read one book the entire year. I said, if you read one page every day
Yes.
for an entire year,
Yeah.
you're gonna read 365 pages, which is the average page length of most books out there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
say you read one book by the end of the year if you read one page every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
And,
such a
and
small effort if you think about it.
yeah.
It's such a small time commitment.
Yeah.
It is very
Yeah.
much doable, but it
Yeah.
requires that discipline. It requires that consistency, that Joanna, Emmanuel, Andre Luis, all these spiritual benefactors talk about.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're on target here. But because let's pretend I am your patient. I'm not, but let's pretend, Yuri, I'm your patient, and I come to you suffering, and you, as a clinician, you can see classic signs of OCD. What would you tell me that could help me just a few minutes feel better? What are the things that perhaps you can discuss to somebody who's suffering right now?
Yeah. So from a clinical standpoint, at least in the United States here, when we're talking clinical
Mhm.
interventions for OCD, the most commonly used is CBT, which
Okay.
stands for cognitive behavior therapy. So
Ah,
we're going to be
okay.
working, with the thoughts, the emotions, the behavior, which is very much the crux of OCD. If we think about the
Yeah.
obsessions, the thoughts, and the compulsory behaviors, so like the
Yeah.
thoughts and the behaviors,
So talk
the
therapy, right? Talk therapy, as some may refer to it or no?
It is a type of talk therapy, but it's very much it's very like applicable, very much applicable to the day to day. I think that a lot of the times
Mhm.
when we think of talk therapy, we have that Freudian version
Yeah.
of somebody lying in a couch and the therapist is behind just taking notes while they look at the ceiling and do free association.
And
But
again, the movies about their doodling, right? I'm serious. As I'm talking to you, all the images from past movies come into my mind of what is this? The
I
magic
told you
whistles
there's a
that we have.
misrepresentation on
Yeah,
so many different angles
yeah,
of even
yeah,
my profession. But the
yeah,
thing with CBT is
yeah.
very much a collaborative approach, and with somebody bringing to OCD specifically, this
Uh-huh,
idea that we're going to be treating, the approaching the thoughts, the compulsory behaviors, and all of those things. One of the things that I'll tell you that brings relief when people come with OCD and they are unaware, perhaps, that they have OCD, or they think they have but they don't, or they are going to start treating it. Knowing more about the condition is very helpful.
yeah.
So we call that
Ah,
psychoeducation. So providing psychoeducation as far as
mm-hmm.
what's the percentage of people in the United States that suffer from this? Is this more common in males or females? At what age? Like these types, even these types of statistical information, people can
Yeah.
appreciate, because
Mm.
oftentimes, and this is applicable to, I think, every disorder across the map that I've seen, is people often feel like, oh, I'm not the only one. That they
I'm
often
not
feel like, "Oh,
alone.
there's more
Yeah.
people suffering from this. There's treatment for that." We see that a lot with, like I said,
Uh-huh.
other conditions, autism being one of them. But
Yeah.
the idea of, having this sort of understanding, like, okay, so there is a name for this. There are symptoms. There is a criteria. There is a treatment
Uh-huh.
for that. And
Yeah.
specifically with OCD, when we're talking CBT, like I said, one type of CBT intervention that we do is called exposure response prevention. I don't want to be too technical, but the
Yeah.
idea is we're going to be lowering the amount of times that gradually that they're
Mhm.
doing the compensatory behavior, because they're
Mhm.
going to see that the results are still the same if they wash their hands 2 times
Ye
versus 100 times.
Yeah.
So
And
in a very simple nutshell,
no, no,
that's
this
the
is
the
this
goal.
is this is really important. But what comes to my mind as you're speaking about, and thank you, Yuri, for sharing with us what are the things or the steps that you do when you see somebody with OCD. But to me, it just highlights that is a partnership, right? It's a partnership, and number one, but the other component of it as a partnership, it really requires trust, right?
Definitely.
And trust that I really need to, again, a caricature here, but to wash my hands 3 times. No, you don't. Right? Why not? And that really delving into your thought processes and your intellectual ability to analyze the situation and be able to extricate the compulsion or the behavior, right? That requires you to do multiple times
Yes.
a given task. So it's really rationalize what are what you are achieving. And if I go back to the large impact that the pandemic did, I do know that, for example, and I know this is very personal example, that someone I know, we just had to turn off the TV. Turn off TV. It was as simple as that. The the growing and frightful. This is early days, of course. Growth of the COVID patients and the inability for the healthcare providers globally to respond, either by enough beds in hospitals, et cetera, provided such a source of discomfort that just turn off the TV. Turn off
Yeah.
TV, right? And so I think sometimes we need to do some things as drastic as that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I don't know if it is even that drastic, because what you're doing is you're eliminating the trigger. So if
I
we're being
see.
more technical with the words, it's a very
Yeah,
good, it's a simple, rather
yeah,
simple intervention, just to like to eliminate that trigger. Because yeah, it is true. Like we all, especially with the pandemic, that's one that
yeah,
comes to our minds, right? Because it was a couple of years ago. It's very like
yeah,
recent still, and
yeah,
it definitely increased. the anxiety, spiked the anxiety of
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody was Nobody was impervious to that, because we live in a society. We
Hmm.
all saw what was happening. It was very much
Yeah.
not understand, like the virus and everything was like, where is this coming from? What do we
Yeah.
do? How are we really safe? And if you think about OCD, I
Yeah.
know we've been talking about the fear of contamination, but there's like different types as well. And I think that
Yeah.
in our conversation regarding Joanne, I think what good connection with understanding other aspects, perhaps more the
Yeah.
spiritual aspects that can connect with
Yeah.
OCD when we think about, like the OCD regarding having harmful thoughts towards
Yes.
someone, or like religious obsessions or hoarding obsessions. They're like different types of unwanted thoughts and obsessions that can come to someone that
Hmm.
perhaps is like unresolved conflicts or
Yeah.
something else. I think
Yeah.
interesting we bring that up as well.
Yeah, so as we're approaching the end of our time together, Yuri, I'm thinking if we come here and we're saying that yes, one of the root cause, one of many, it may be unresolved inner conflicts. How do we go by resolving those inner conflicts? Because prayer and meditation may not be the right tools for that. How do we do this? Because I have some thoughts, but I would love to hear from you.
I think it all depends on what it is necessarily, the obsession and like
Sure.
the severity. I think there's a few factors to consider. But if I were to give like a blank statement, like the
Sure.
prayer, the
Yeah.
meditation, the habits that we often don't think about, like you said, eating,
Yeah.
sleeping, people often don't
Yeah.
realize how important it is to all mental health conditions
That's a
for
very
us
good point. Yeah. Yeah.
to have a balanced sleep and diet. There's so many people with symptoms of inattention that they think they have ADHD, when in fact what they do is they have sleep deprivation. And
Yeah.
it's as simple as that. Of course, some do have ADHD, but the idea,
Yeah.
seeking, like I said, seeking treatment, psychological treatment. There's different types of therapy. We mentioned CBT, but there's other types of therapy that even can
Yeah.
incorporate the mind body spirit connection, even
Yeah.
that can help somebody with OCD because of these unresolved conflicts. So
Yeah.
psychiatry. There's so many different ways to approach like the same problem.
Yeah. And I'm gonna flip back to the spiritual connection. Spiritism. There's a lot in spiritism that we can uh, discuss here in discussing the obsession, and the obsession being a connection to your past life, your spiritual influences, etc. We're not going to have time today to talk about it, but that's when this enormous body of work that discusses that from a spiritual viewpoint uh, goes back to the whole idea of prayer and meditation, right? So it's not just an oversimplistic type of go-to for everything. It is tremendously helpful for all of us to seek not just a moment of quiet, of meditation, but a moment of connection to our spirituality, connection to the divine through prayer, in using your faith. And faith is ultimately, right, Yuri, what is a testament of that faith that what seems to be so chaotic and out of control is indeed controllable, and there is this divine mercy that will not leave you alone in distress, in the moments of distress, against this very, very complex, very difficult world.
No, I agree. And in the end, if we think Joanna, Emmanuel, like all these other authors, it all goes back to
Yes.
the mind. It all
Yes.
goes back to, Joanna says the mind being this fertile ground, you know,
Yeah.
for what? Like how do we
Yeah.
express that? These unresolved conflicts. And we can
Yeah.
discuss at some other point, like how spiritual obsessions can impact
Yeah.
somebody's OCD, or like a trauma from a past life that's coming back
Sure.
now, and
Or
then
childhood. Yeah. Yeah.
right, we try to treat it, but it's the root cause is so much deeper, and without the spiritual understanding of the idea of how we connect with the spirit world, how we have this multiple lives that we have had, the reincarnation idea, like without factoring those variables, it becomes an unsolvable puzzle, because like, where is this coming from?
Yeah,
How are these thoughts
correct.
coming to my head? But it all goes back to the mind, to this inner temple that Emmanuel also says that we must take care of. We must, use it well and keep it, like clean and organized, so we can
I
connect
love
better
it.
with our spirituality, with
Yeah.
ourselves, and with God.
Yeah. I just want to leave everyone here. If you are suffering from OCD, or if you have a close friend or dear one who is going through that, you may want to seek help. But also, in our own lives, let's try planning and preparing as much as possible to mitigate, to diminish the impacts of stress or right anxiety. And for example, I mentioned moving to a new home, which can become such a beautiful step in our lives. It's our first home, or you're moving to a new city and it's closer to perhaps your children's and your grandchildren. This is all hypothetical, of course, but if you're moving there, let's try to plan. I'm a project manager, so this is my my go-to tool. But let's create a timeline. Let's create what are the key milestones for you to achieve that. What are the tasks that you need to do? So by breaking down this enormous activity that triggers not only fear, anxiety, and also OCD, let's make it very um, manageable, achievable, right? And to provide that better sense of control. Any other, maybe any other tools that you can quickly give to everyone here?
I think I was gonna mention that word, but you mentioned right at the end, and I think it summarized everything: the sense of control. Because
Sense of
in an
control. Yeah.
unpredictable, even if we're moving to a new house, our dream house,
Yes.
we don't know the future. There's so many things we can't control, that like, somebody's gonna come install something and they're gonna redo the floors, or we're gonna move in. How's the moving gonna be? Are they gonna break anything in the truck? There's so many things that can pop up and like spike that
Yes.
anxiety. So if whatever we can control, when we can bring a sense of control, okay, I'm going to do one task per day. I'm going to break it
Yes.
in smaller pieces, like you were saying so eloquently before. That is already gonna no that already helps. We say to foster the sense of control in an
Yeah.
otherwise uncontrollable, very unpredictable world. So whatever little control we can do to help lower that anxiety, definitely let's work on that.
Yeah. So me and my OCD, we can say, we got this. We got this.
We got this. There are ways out of that. Yes.
Very good. Well, Yuri, thank you. It's such a pleasure. Maybe we could come back again and explore this subject further. I'd love to hear from you on this and many other discussions that we have in our program. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone who's here with us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.